Buried deep within the forgotten archives of the Wisconsin Diocese lies a collection of documents that the Catholic Church has spent over 160 years desperately trying to erase from memory. These records chronicle the chilling and systematic disappearance of 23 nuns from St. Mary's Convent, located near the shores of Lake Michigan between the years 1854 and 1862. Official church statements have long brushed off these entries as clerical mistakes and innocent misinterpretations, yet evidence recently brought to light tells a far darker tale. The testimony of 3 separate diocesan inspectors, coupled with a hidden cache of private letters found sealed within a wall cavity during recent renovations, paint a picture so disturbing that even seasoned historians have questioned whether such horrors could truly have taken place behind sacred walls. What follows is the first full account of what many now believe to be the most sinister case of religious corruption in the annals of American history. A scandal so damning that the Church has invested unimaginable sums to ensure it never reached your ears. Before we continue unraveling the mystery of St. Mary's Convent, a brief pause if you're already feeling the unease creeping in. Consider subscribing to our channel for more deeply researched and historically grounded investigations into America's darkest spiritual shadows. Our community of truth seekers stretches across all 50 states. Tell us, where are you tuning in from tonight? Leave a comment below. Now let us return to the windswept Wisconsin countryside of 1854, where our story first takes root. A heavy morning fog clung to the shores of Lake Michigan as the wheels of Bishop William Quarter's carriage groaned through the iron gates of what would soon become St. Mary's Convent. The Catholic Church had acquired the sprawling estate, a former lumber baron's mansion nestled within 30 acres of brooding forest with grand ambitions. It was to become the first significant Catholic outpost in Wisconsin's largely Protestant territory. This move was part of a greater church campaign to plant Catholic roots in America's untamed frontier, where Protestant denominations were already spreading rapidly and gaining converts. The estate's limestone mansion, with its 3 vast wings and solitary bell tower, towered solemnly over the modest wood-framed churches that dotted the surrounding hillsides. The central structure, erected in 1842, was a foreboding marvel of Gothic architecture. Its narrow, pointed windows gazed out like wary sentinels upon the wilderness beyond. 2 great wings stretched from its sides, the eastern wing designated for the convent's nuns' quarters, and the western earmarked for an orphanage and future infirmary. Tucked behind the mansion stood a modest chapel. Its sharp spire pierced the skyline, visible for miles across the flat rolling expanse of prairie and pine. But not everyone welcomed the church's growing presence. Local Protestant families watched the new arrivals with wary eyes. The nuns, clad in black habits and speaking in soft Irish lilts, seemed alien to the predominantly German and Scandinavian settlers who called the region home. The people of the land, mostly Lutheran and Methodist, had long cherished the egalitarian spirit of their own religious traditions. In contrast, the Catholic Church, with its hierarchical structure, rituals, incense, and Latin chants, felt like something shadowed and foreign. On the day of the convent's consecration, a gathering of skeptical locals stood silently beyond the gates, murmuring to one another as they observed the solemn procession. Papists muttered Elijah Hoffman, a respected elder of the local Lutheran congregation, his voice thick with mistrust, as he watched the robed figures slip into the chapel. They'll bring their old world ways here, poison our children with their idols and false saints. Beside him, Wilhelm Schmidt's eyes remained fixed on the scene. My grandfather fled Germany to escape Catholic persecution, he said darkly. Now, they followed us even here. This attitude, though not shared by all, captured the simmering religious tensions that would soon shape the tragic events to unfold. St. Mary's proclaimed Bishop Quarter before a small assembly of clergy and local dignitaries will stand as a beacon of God's mercy in this wilderness. His words rang out through the newly completed chapel, where the pale morning light streamed through modest stained glass windows, casting soft mosaics of crimson gold and indigo across the polished wooden pews. Under the guidance of Mother Superior Catherine Murphy, the bishop declared, "This convent shall offer refuge to orphans, solace to widows, and healing to the sick." The bishop's Bostonian lilt echoed warmly off the chapel's limestone walls as he introduced the three women chosen to lead this sacred outpost: Mother Superior Catherine's sister Elizabeth Foster and Sister Margaret Clark, each one seasoned by years of service in established Eastern convents, had answered the call to forge faith on the frontier. Mother Catherine commanded instant attention. At 42, she stood straight and unflinching in her tailored black habit, her angular features sharp as chiseled marble, her pale blue eyes unsettling in their clarity eyes that seemed to strip away pretense and peer directly into the soul. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone long accustomed to both obedience and authority. Her hands, when folded in prayer, bore the grace of an artist and the discipline of a judge, elegant but unyielding. Those who met her rarely forgot her presence. Mother Catherine arrives with the highest recommendations, the bishop continued. Her exemplary work at St. Augustine's in Boston has prepared her for the unique trials that life in this frontier will demand. Next stood Sister Elizabeth Foster. 38 years old, her demeanor a gentle balm to the severity of her superior. With soft cheeks flushed in pink and a smile that rarely faded, she exuded warmth. Her voice, always calm and slightly hesitant, carried the air of careful thoughtfulness, a quality many mistook for simple kindness, though some would later question whether that gentleness masked something more deliberate. She was appointed head of the orphanage, a natural fit for her motherly presence and open heart. Then there was Sister Margaret Clark, 35, the quiet alchemist of the group. Her deep knowledge of herbs and traditional medicines had earned her admiration from physicians in both Boston and New York. Slender and reserved, with deft fingers and a scholar's focus, she bore the air of a woman who lived by precise measures. Her dark, observant eyes never seemed to rest, and when she walked, she did so with a stillness that made her seem as much ghost as woman. The convent infirmary would be her domain. Flanking these three leaders were 20 younger nuns, most in their early 20s, and freshly arrived from Ireland. They formed a perfect line, habits, immaculate heads, bowed in ritual humility as Bishop Quarter offered blessings to each by name: Sister Agnes O'Connor, Sister Bernadette Walsh, Sister Teresa Donovan, Sister Mary Collins. These were girls who had left behind not only homeland and kin, but the certainty of a world they understood, all in service to a God they had pledged to follow into unknown territory. Their faces remained solemn during the blessing, but every now and then, when eyes drifted away, brief flashes of emotion betrayed them, moments of fear, wonder, and homesick longing. "The Lord has called us into this wilderness," Mother Catherine addressed her sisters that first night. They gathered in the refectory where flickering candlelight danced along the stone walls, casting wavering shadows like phantoms of the forest beyond. The room smelled faintly of fresh bread and weak black tea. The chill of an early Wisconsin autumn crept in through every seam of the old stone undeterred, even by the large hearth glowing at the far end of the hall. "We will face hardships our sisters in the East will never know." Mother Catherine continued, her voice clear and steady. "We will encounter suspicion from those who do not understand our faith. But through devotion and sacrifice we shall endure. We shall build something holy here." The younger nuns, exiled from familiarity and plunged into a strange new land, clung to her words like a lifeline in the darkness. Later that evening, as the fires burned low and the girls readied for bed, whispers passed between them like secret prayers. Sister Agnes leaned close to Sister Bernadette, the straw mattress creaking beneath them. "She speaks like the saints, doesn't she?" Agnes murmured. "She speaks like someone who's not afraid of anything," Bernadette replied, eyes wide in the moonlight. Their narrow cots, spaced barely an arm's length apart in the dormitory-style sleeping quarters, left little room for privacy, yet the closeness bred comfort in their shared isolation. "Do you think the locals will ever accept us?" Sister Agnes whispered into the darkness, her voice carrying a faint tremor, betraying the brave composure she had fought to maintain all day. Sister Bernadette reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "They feared our Lord too," at first she replied softly. "We must show them with our deeds that we bring only goodness." Their quiet conversation ended suddenly at the sound of measured footsteps in the corridor, the steady tread of Mother Catherine making her rounds. Even on their first night, she walked the halls with silent vigilance, ensuring order and devotion reigned. In the weeks that followed, St. Mary's quickly settled into the strict cadence of a functioning religious community. The daily rhythm began before the sun with matins at 3:00 a.m. The bell's toll cleaved through the pre-dawn darkness like a solemn summons, rousing the sisters from warm beds to kneel on frigid chapel stones. 7 times a day, the low ancient drone of Latin chants rose through the vaulted ceilings and filtered into the woods beyond. From matins to Compline at 9:00 p.m., the sacred sound became as much a part of the surrounding countryside as the sigh of wind through the pines or the far-off lowing of cattle. Between these holy hours, the sisters filled their waking moments with tireless labor. They operated a small but growing orphanage, cared for the sick in a humble infirmary, and cultivated thriving vegetable gardens. Their days adhered to a rigid schedule: prayer work, simple meals, brief moments of recreation. Then more prayer, a pattern designed to suppress personal wants and channel every ounce of energy toward divine service. By the winter of 1854, the orphanage housed 12 children, most the offspring of Irish laborers who had perished building railroads or harvesting timber. Sister Elizabeth managed their care with seemingly boundless tenderness. Her days were filled with soft-spoken instruction in letters and numbers, braided together with catechism and comforting ritual. On Sundays after Mass, curious townsfolk sometimes visited bearing sweetmeats or knitted socks, and inquired quietly about adoption, though few could afford the burden. Sister Margaret's infirmary began with little more than a shelf of earthen jars and a single bed, yet within months her reputation spread. Her knowledge of poultices to draw out infection teas, brewed for fever, and compresses wrapped tight against aching chests proved invaluable, especially during the brutal Wisconsin winter, when roads disappeared beneath snowdrifts and physicians became unreachable. Her quiet skill earned the begrudging admiration of even the convent's most skeptical neighbors. Slowly, suspicion gave way to a guarded respect. "They keep to themselves," admitted Elijah Hoffman one Sunday to his congregation, "but they do good work. Their ways are not our ways." But perhaps there's room for different paths to heaven in this wide country. Among the youngest of the sisters was 23-year-old Sister Agnes O'Connor. Her letters home to County Clare, now preserved in the archives of the Dublin Diocese, offer a rare, intimate window into those early days at St. Mary's. Her handwriting, neat, careful, with ornate loops and precise spacing, fills page after page with wide-eyed observations about her strange new world. Yet attentive readers might detect a subtle change in tone as the months wore on. "The work is harder than I ever imagined," she confessed in a letter dated December 1854. "The paper bears faint smudges where the ink bled perhaps from tears. My hands are raw from scrubbing linens in freezing water, and the chapel stones are so cold they numb our knees during morning prayers. But Mother Catherine assures us our sacrifices are pleasing to God." She continued, "Sister Elizabeth has been especially kind. She brings me extra blankets on the coldest nights, and she's so patient in teaching me how to soothe the little ones. Sister Margaret's herbs saved us during the fever that swept through last month. The children burned with such heat, we feared they'd be lost to us. But her tincture of willow bark and honey brought the fever down. I truly believe we are doing God's work here. Though I must confess I still cry myself to sleep some nights longing for the green hills of home. Yet these letters do not tell the whole story. What Sister Agnes could not yet see, or perhaps could not name, were the quiet but undeniable changes already settling into the stone bones of St. Mary's. The character of the convent was shifting subtly at first, but unmistakably. Where once Mother Catherine's leadership had been merely strict, now it began to lean towards something harder, something colder. Her words, once inspiring, grew sharp. Her gaze, once protective, became watchful. And though the sisters spoke little of it aloud, each began to feel the weight of her expectations grow heavier day by day. Minor transgressions that had once drawn gentle correction now brought with them harsh and unforgiving punishments. The shift was gradual but unmistakable. By January of 1855, the climate inside St. Mary's had grown colder, more rigid. Discipline, once a guiding principle, had become a weapon. Sister Josephine Brady's hands trembled one winter evening as she tried to mend a tear in her habit. Earlier that day, she had broken the sacred silence of afternoon prayers with a sudden coughing fit. A mere accident. Yet the response had been merciless. She was ordered to kneel on dried peas and recite the full rosary, a penance so severe it left her knees cracked and bleeding, the skin raw and swollen. Sister Mary Collins knelt beside her, now quietly threading the needle and passing it into Josephine's unsteady hands. Their eyes met a fleeting moment of shared pain and sympathy. "Do not draw attention to her weakness." The words, sharp and cold, sliced through the stillness of the workroom. Mother Catherine had entered without sound, her presence sudden and unnerving. This ability to move silently unnoticed had become increasingly unsettling to the younger nuns. Sister Josephine must learn that discipline is the cornerstone of devotion. She continued, her pale gaze sweeping across the room. Each of you would do well to remember it. By the spring of 1855, the world beyond the convent walls spoke only of St. Mary's admirable charity. When a measles outbreak spread through the local lumber camps, Sister Margaret treated dozens of workers, many of them Protestant, without hesitation or complaint. Her clinic, though modest, became a sanctuary for the sick and dying. The convent began receiving modest donations from grateful families. Even ministers from neighboring congregations, once wary of the Catholic sisters, began to acknowledge the goodness radiating from within those limestone walls. To the outside world, St. Mary's was a model of piety and Christian mercy, but no one beyond its gates saw the slow unraveling taking place inside. Mealtimes, once marked by soft conversation and shared reflection, became silent affairs. The sisters sat in rows, eyes lowered to their bowls of watery soup or thin slices of bread lips, sealed save for whispered prayers. The designated recreation hour, formerly a time of quiet joy, knitting soft laughter, shared memories had grown hollow and stiff. Words were chosen with care. Glances were cautious. The young women who had crossed an ocean together now moved through their days like sleepwalker shadows in habits fearful of standing out. The first unmistakable sign that something was deeply wrong came in April 1855. That morning, as the chapel bells rang and the sisters assembled in their usual order, one space remained empty. Sister Agnes O'Connor's spot, second from the end in the second row, was vacant. The others noticed immediately. A ripple of unease passed through the line of bowed heads. In a place where uniformity was sacred, absence screamed. During breakfast, Mother Catherine entered with her usual composure. Candlelight played over her severe features as she stood before the long table. "Sister Agnes has been called to assist at our mission in Minnesota," she announced, her voice devoid of emotion. Her departure was sudden, as such divine callings often are. We shall all pray for her continued success in this new endeavor. The room remained still save for the soft scrape of spoons on ceramic. Then a small clatter, a spoon slipping from Sister Bernadette's hand. "But Mother," she began, her voice trembling. She didn't say anything to me," she faltered as Mother Catherine turned her gaze on her eyes, pale and glacial. "Are you suggesting, Sister Bernadette," she said quietly, "that a bride of Christ must seek permission from her sisters rather than her superiors before answering God's call?" The question hung in the air, brittle and dangerous. "No, Mother." "Forgive me," Bernadette whispered, lowering her eyes to her cooling porridge. No one had seen Sister Agnes prepare to leave. No bags had been packed. No farewells spoken. and in her letters home carefully written, always full of detail, she had made no mention of a transfer or distant mission work. But in the rigid hierarchy of convent life, to question one's superior, especially a mother superior, was unthinkable. And so silence prevailed. That evening, as the nuns returned to their dormitory, some noticed that Sister Agnes's few possessions were no longer visible. Her prayer book was gone. So were her woolen stockings, the extra pair her mother had sewn for the brutal Wisconsin winters, and the small wooden rosary she treasured. It was as if she had, indeed, packed and gone. Yet Sister Mary Collins, whose cot stood directly beside Agnes's, whispered to Sister Teresa Donovan as they took their brief walk through the convent's garden path. Her cloak, she said, eyes scanning the lengthening shadows, it's still hanging on its peg. Would she have left without it? In April to Minnesota, Sister Mary Collins whispered. Sister Teresa Donovan glanced toward the frost-rimmed window panes, her brows drawn with unease. Perhaps she was given a new one for the journey she offered, though her tone lacked conviction. We should not speculate, Sister. 3 months passed. Then Sister Bernadette Walsh vanished. Once again, no farewell, no preparation. Just an empty cot, a folded habit, and another hastily provided explanation. The bishop has requested Sister Bernadette's assistance with a delicate matter in Chicago. Mother Catherine announced during morning prayers, her voice as composed as ever. She left before dawn to catch the early train. Later that day, during the sisters' work period, Sister Elizabeth offered more details. Her voice calmed her hands, folding linens with practiced care. She showed such skill with the orphans. She said that the bishop asked she help establish proper procedures at the new foundling home in the city. Her words carried the appropriate blend of reverence and obedience. But Sister Mary, watching her from across the table, saw something off. The warmth usually present in Sister Elizabeth's eyes had vanished. They remained cold and distant, like glass over water. By the winter of 1855, 3 more nuns had been transferred to distant missions. The same pattern repeated itself, a sudden absence followed by an official announcement. It was always the younger sisters who vanished, those who stood out for their beauty, their sweetness, their innocence. They would fail to appear at morning prayer. No packing, no letters, no goodbyes. Mother Catherine would then inform the remaining sisters that the missing nun had been called to serve in a faraway mission, always somewhere difficult to reach or verify. Montreal, Missouri Territory, Northern Michigan. Concerned families who wrote to these destinations received delayed replies, short and oddly formal, offering few details of the nuns' new assignments or health. Years later, forensic handwriting experts would analyze these letters. All had been written by the same person, and none were the missing nuns. Sister Teresa Donovan was one of the few who dared speak openly of the growing unease. Strong and tall from years working her family's farm, she was unafraid of honest labor or honest questions. Already she had earned Mother Catherine's silent disapproval for questioning the increasing harshness of penances imposed on the younger sisters. It seems strange, she whispered to Sister Mary Collins one warm afternoon in the summer of 1856, as they worked side by side in the garden, hands dusty and stained with soil, that Rome would order so many transfers without proper paperwork. That year, the convent gardens had expanded. A new section had been added near the rear fence, tall and covered in ivy, where medicinal herbs grew in strict rows. That area Sister Margaret tended personally. No one else was permitted to enter, not even the kitchen sisters. And have you noticed? Teresa added her Irish brogue, growing thicker with agitation. It's always the youngest, the prettiest. First Agnes with her golden hair, then Bernadette with that lovely singing voice, then Catherine with her porcelain skin, and Josephine with her. She trailed off as a shadow passed over the garden bed. Sister Mary followed her gaze. There, standing motionless at the edge of the window, was Sister Margaret. Her thin face was unreadable, her eyes blank. Watching. Shh, Mary hissed. Please don't say more. We must be careful. Mother Catherine has her reasons, she added quickly, her voice louder now, for the watcher above. We must trust her wisdom. The following week, Sister Teresa Donovan was gone. The official announcement came at morning prayers. She has been called to a contemplative retreat in Montreal. Mother Catherine said, her hands folded at her waist. Let us offer a prayer for her spiritual renewal. Sister Mary said nothing. She bowed her head like the others, her lips moving in automatic prayer. But her heart pounded with fear. That evening, as she prepared her bed, she noticed something strange. Beneath her pillow was a single torn page from a prayer book. In the narrow margin, scrawled in hurried, uneven handwriting, were 5 words. Something is wrong. If I disappear, tell Father Ryan. The ink was still fresh. Sister Mary stared at the paper, her hands trembling. A chill crept over her skin that had nothing to do with the autumn wind whistling against the stone walls. By 1857, the pattern was undeniable. Of the original 20 junior sisters who had arrived at St. Mary's, only 12 remained, and no one dared ask why. The official explanations continued, each more routine than the last special missions, extended retreats, emergency transfers to aid nursing staff during disease outbreaks. To the outside world, St. Mary's appeared as steadfast and sacred as ever. The chapel bell still tolled its solemn voice, echoing across the countryside. Local families continued bringing their sick to Sister Margaret's infirmary. Orphans still received warm meals, lessons, and lullabies from Sister Elizabeth's orphanage. Sunday, visitors saw no signs of darkness behind the high stone walls, only the familiar black-clad figures moving in silent processions from chapel to garden to refectory, like a living hymn to divine obedience. But inside those limestone walls, fear had become a constant companion. The remaining sisters spoke in hushed tones, avoiding solitude whenever possible. They flinched at footsteps in the night and watched with mounting dread as their ranks grew thinner and thinner. What had once been a community of service and devotion now felt more like a cloistered prison, ruled by a woman whose authority had calcified into tyranny. Mother Catherine's grip tightened daily. Minor infractions drew brutal punishments. Days of fasting, nights spent kneeling on stone floors until limbs went numb, public confessions of private thoughts. Sins once whispered only to the confessional were now declared aloud before the entire community as if humiliation itself were holy. When Sister Claire O'Donnell was discovered with a small square of chocolate, a gift from her family tucked carefully beneath her pillow, she was dragged before the others, trembling, forced to confess gluttony and deception unworthy of a bride of Christ. Her cheeks burned as Mother Catherine sentenced her to 3 days of fasting, only water and a single crust of bread each evening. On the second day, Sister Claire collapsed mid-prayer, her body giving out on the cold chapel floor. It was Sister Margaret who revived her, pressing a vial of smelling salts beneath her nose. Her thin lips curved slightly as she looked down at the unconscious nun. Some said it was a smile. Then, in January 1858, one of the coldest winters yet, Sister Mary Collins awoke in the night to the sound of muffled sobbing through the thin wall beside her. Sister Rebecca Murphy's cell. Mary lay still, breath caught in her throat, as the sobs were followed by a voice she instantly recognized, sharp and low, with the unmistakable edge of command. "You will come with us now. Make any noise and you'll regret it." It was Mother Catherine. There was a shuffle of movement, a soft thump, then silence. Mary remained motionless in her narrow cot heart, pounding so loudly she feared they'd hear it through the walls. Her ears strained as footsteps creaked along the corridor, 3 sets, not just one. Then a sound that would haunt her dreams for years to come. A faint strangled cry cut off, followed by the unmistakable scrape of a body being dragged. Not walking, dragged. The next morning at breakfast, Mother Catherine stood once more before the refectory. Her expression was calm, composed. Sister Rebecca has been called to serve at a frontier mission in the Dakota Territory, she announced. The native children there require instruction, and Sister Rebecca's patience with the orphans has prepared her well for this holy task. Her pale eyes scanned the room, pausing for the briefest moment on Sister Mary. "We shall miss her gentle presence," she added, "but we rejoice in God's purpose for her talents." Sister Mary's hands trembled as she reached for her rosary. The beads clicked together, betraying her fear. She forced herself through morning prayers, lips moving, heart racing, mind spiraling through unbearable questions. What had happened to Sister Rebecca? What had happened to them all? Later that day, assigned to sweep the corridor outside Mother Catherine's office, Mary found herself alone outside the heavy oak door, slightly ajar. Inside, voices carried. She froze. "The doctor says this one will fetch a higher price." It was Sister Elizabeth. The tone of her voice chilled Mary to the bone. Gone was the warmth, the maternal softness. In its place was something cold, practical, unrecognizable. "He says men pay extra for the innocent ones." The sound of glass bottles clinking followed Sister Margaret, sorting her tinctures. "We need to be more careful with the timing," Margaret said. 3 in 1 month raises questions. The bishop's secretary mentioned it in his last letter. Mary could hardly breathe. "The bishop is easily managed," came Mother Catherine's voice, smooth with confidence. "Another donation to his cathedral fund, and his questions will vanish. Besides, we've established the pattern well enough." No one questions nuns being sent to frontier missions or succumbing to illness in service. Then a pause. What about the Collins girl? Sister Margaret asked, voice low. She watches too closely. I've seen her listening at doors. A heavy silence followed. Sister Mary crouched outside the office, felt her blood run cold. Every muscle in her body tensed. Had they seen her? Had they heard her? We'll wait, Mother Catherine replied at last. Her voice was low, dismissive. She's too plain to fetch much, and she keeps up correspondence with her brother at the seminary. Disappearing her now would raise questions. Too many vanishings at once, and someone will notice. She's not worth the trouble, added Sister Margaret. Rebecca will satisfy the doctor's clients for now. That was enough. Sister Mary fled before she could be discovered. Her feet silent against the stone floor, her thoughts racing faster than her steps. What had happened to Sister Rebecca the night before? What monstrous fate had she been taken to? And who was this doctor they spoke of with such clinical indifference? The clues began snapping into place like jagged glass. The pattern of missing sisters, all young, all beautiful. The well-dressed strangers who arrived unannounced and were given private tours of the convent. The distant screams and dragging sounds at night from the locked north wing, off limits to all but Mother Catherine and Sister Margaret. And the money. Always the money. The convent's mysterious improvements and the steadily growing wealth despite its outward image of poverty and service. After a sleepless night filled with whispered prayers and gnawing dread, Sister Mary made a decision. A dangerous one, a desperate one. She waited for her weekly chore collecting eggs from the convent's chickens. It was the only time she was allowed outside the gates unaccompanied. And even then, only briefly. That morning, Jimmy Fletcher, the 12-year-old son of a nearby farmer, arrived with the daily milk delivery. His cheeks were red from the cold, and his boots still wet with melted snow. As he turned to leave, Sister Mary brushed past him, deliberate and quick, slipping a small folded note into the pocket of his coat. The boy froze in surprise. She had never spoken directly to him before. It was strictly forbidden. She met his eyes. "Please deliver this to Father Thomas," she whispered. "At St. Joseph's Church." Then she pressed something into his small hand, a silver cross cool from her palm. "My confirmation gift," she murmured. "Tell no one. Lives depend on it." Jimmy stared at the cross, his freckled face suddenly solemn. "Yes, sister," he whispered. "I promise." The note, now preserved in diocesan archives, was simple, written in a trembling hand. "Something evil is happening at St. Mary's. Nuns are disappearing, not transferred as claimed. I fear for my life. Please send help. Sister Mary Collins." Father Thomas Ryan, a young Irish priest newly assigned to the region, received the message the following afternoon. He sat alone in his modest study, sunlight streaming through the dusty window, reading the note again and again. The silver cross rested in his palm, its weight far heavier than its size would suggest. He recognized it at once, a common confirmation gift for Catholic girls. A nun would never part with such a thing lightly. The urgency in Sister Mary's words struck him like a blow, and it confirmed something he had long suspected. On his monthly visits to St. Mary's, he had noticed the dwindling number of sisters. The vague explanations, the increasingly tight-lipped behavior of the remaining nuns, and always, always, the unshakable presence of Mother Catherine, cold, commanding, unyielding. But what could he do? As a low-ranking parish priest, he had no authority to challenge a Mother Superior, especially one as respected and well-connected as Catherine Murphy. He needed help, real help. Instead of confronting her directly, Father Ryan mounted his horse and rode for Milwaukee the next morning. The late winter roads were a misery of thawing ice and sucking mud, but he pressed on through wind and exhaustion. He arrived nearly 24 hours later, his cassock torn and spattered his boots. Ruined, but his resolve intact. He requested an immediate audience with Bishop John Henney. The bishop received him in a richly appointed study, paneled in dark cherrywood and warmed by a roaring fire. A carafe of brandy and a crystal glass waited on the side table. The smell of cigar smoke clung to the heavy drapes. At first, the conversation revolved around the bishop's current obsession, the construction of the new St. John's Cathedral in downtown Milwaukee. "It will be the finest cathedral west of New York," the bishop exclaimed, his thick German accent coloring each word. He unfurled architectural drawings with childlike excitement. "A true monument to our faith in this Protestant wilderness." Father Ryan nodded politely, allowing the bishop his enthusiasm. But he could feel the urgency building in his chest like steam behind a dam. When the bishop finally paused long enough to inquire about Father Ryan's own parish, the young priest saw his opportunity. Carefully, deliberately, he began to explain. He spoke of his visits to St. Mary's, of the missing nuns, of the inconsistencies in Mother Catherine's explanations, of the note, of the cross, and most of all, the fear palpable, growing and real. The dwindling number of sisters at St. Mary's, the vague, conflicting stories, and now this desperate scrawled plea from Sister Mary Collins. Father Ryan laid it all out before the bishop. As he spoke, Bishop John Henney's countenance changed. The jovial warmth with which he had welcomed the young priest cooled into something harder, unreadable. His hands folded over his cassock, and he leaned back, eyeing the silver cross that lay untouched between them. "These are serious accusations, Father," he said at last, voice even but clipped. He made no move to examine the cross. "Mother Catherine has accounted for every transfer to my satisfaction. But, Your Excellency," Father Ryan pressed, 8 sisters have disappeared in under 3 years. No official transfer records. No letters to their families. No confirmations from their supposed destinations. The frontier missions, the bishop interrupted with a note of finality, require adaptable and educated women. These sisters were selected precisely for those traits. He rose the folds of his robe, rustling faintly, a clear signal the meeting was over. "I will not have rumors disrupting the church's standing in this already fragile Protestant region. The Mother Superior has been extraordinarily generous to the Cathedral Fund. Her leadership is an example of divine purpose." As he ushered Father Ryan toward the door, a thin line of steel crept into his voice. "Attend to your parish duties, Father. Leave the governance of convents to those whom God has chosen for such responsibilities." Father Ryan walked out into the cathedral courtyard with wind in his cassock and disappointment gripping his chest like a vice. But beneath that weight determination, if formal channels refused to act, he would find another path. Providence or irony provided one just weeks later. In March of 1858, Bishop Henney assigned Father Ryan to collect annual financial reports from parishes and religious institutions throughout the diocese. It was a dull administrative task meant to occupy junior clergy, but to Father Ryan, it was a golden opportunity. With the bishop's seal in hand, he now had legitimate authority to request and examine financial ledgers, St. Mary's included. On a brittle March morning, Father Ryan approached the convent in a rented buggy, the wheels crunching through thawing frost and stray stones. A strange unease settled in his stomach as the limestone structure came into view. St. Mary's looked different. The once orderly gardens were overgrown and untended, the hedges browned with neglect. Fewer birdsong filled the air. The windows once filled with flickering candlelight or the soft movement of sisters were cold and dim. The bell tower, once pealing out sacred hours with clarity, now rang only sporadically. Even its tone had changed, muffled, tired. Sister Elizabeth greeted him at the door. Her face, once plump and serene, now looked drawn. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her habit, typically pristine, bore the faintest stain on the collar, and her veil sat just slightly askew. "Father Ryan," she said, startled. "We weren't expecting you today." She tried to compose herself, stepping aside. "Mother Catherine is indisposed. She sends her apologies. If you'll just leave the diocesan forms, she'll complete them by week's end." Father Ryan didn't move. "I'm afraid the bishop was very specific," he said, removing his overcoat and setting down his briefcase. His voice held a measured firmness, though his heart beat faster than he liked. "This year's audits must be reviewed in person. There have been irregularities." For a moment, something flickered across Sister Elizabeth's eyes. Alarm, anger, weariness. "That won't be possible today," she said quietly. "Our bookkeeper, Sister Margaret, is in the infirmary. A child is dying. She's attending to him. Then I shall wait," Father Ryan said smoothly, settling into a stiff-backed chair in the cold receiving parlor. "I'm in no rush." A silence stretched between them. "I would be grateful," he added, "for a brief tour of the convent while I wait. It's been some time since I've seen the orphanage improvements I've heard so much about." Sister Elizabeth did not reply. She merely blinked. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away. The air in the parlor seemed colder after she left. And Father Ryan had the sudden, unshakable sense that this visit might be the most dangerous thing he had ever done. The expression that flickered across Sister Elizabeth's face, was it fear? Anger was gone almost as quickly as it came. "As you wish, Father," she said with strained politeness. "Though I must ask that you avoid the North Wing. We have several cases of influenza there, and we wouldn't want you exposed." The North Wing, always forbidden. Supposedly housing the sisters' private quarters, a place he had never been allowed to visit. Father Ryan's suspicions deepened. The tour that followed offered more questions than answers. The convent, which on paper housed a thriving mission, seemed half abandoned. In Mother Catherine's most recent report to the diocese, she had claimed to be caring for 20 orphans. Father Ryan counted 7. 7 frail, timid children, their eyes hollow, their shoulders tense. When he tried to speak to a small girl sweeping the dormitory floor, Sister Elizabeth abruptly intervened, her tone sweet but firm, sending the child off with an invented chore. The infirmary was no better. Described in diocesan correspondence as a bustling haven for the ill and dying, it held only 3 patients, elderly, drowsy, and largely unresponsive. None looked to be suffering from influenza, and none stirred as Father Ryan passed by. Sister Margaret, who was supposedly tending a dying child, was conspicuously absent. More troubling still was the dwindling number of sisters. Just 3 months ago, Father Ryan had offered Mass here and distinctly remembered at least 15 nuns in attendance. Today, there were only 8, including Sister Elizabeth, and when he inquired after specific sisters, Sister Rebecca, Sister Josephine, Sister Claire, he received the same vague explanations. Transfers, special assignments, missionary work. Then, as they passed the laundry room where 2 nuns scrubbed silently at steaming basins, he asked with casual tone, "And Sister Mary Collins?" Sister Elizabeth's step hitched almost imperceptibly. Her voice was carefully measured. "Sister Mary has been assigned to our mission in St. Louis," she said, not meeting his eyes. "She left just last week. Her experience with orphans made her a perfect fit for the work there." Father Ryan nodded, schooling his features into polite interest, but inside cold dread clawed through his chest. Sister Mary, his only informant, was now among the vanished. His alarm now fully ignited, he asked to visit the chapel before he departed. What once had been the soul of the convent, the chapel now exuded neglect. Dust had gathered on the altar rail. The candlesticks had not been polished. The wildflowers at the Virgin's feet had wilted, their petals browned and curling. This sacred space, once filled with the chanting of 23 devout voices, now felt hollow like a tomb. While Sister Elizabeth was momentarily drawn away by a whispered message from a novice father, Ryan took his chance. He slipped silently through a side door that led to the residential wing, a path he remembered from earlier visits. The corridor was still. The faint smell of candle wax and old wood hung in the air. Many of the sisters' cells stood open and bare. Beds stripped, belongings gone, evidence of life erased with surgical precision. Just as he turned to retreat, a faint sound met his ear. So faint, he almost doubted it. A whimper. No, a moan. Human. Desperate, muffled by wood and distance. He followed the sound to the end of the corridor, where a heavy oak door stood different from the others. Reinforced with an iron lock, thick and ominous. He leaned closer. "Is someone there?" He whispered, his breath catching in his throat. "Do you need help?" For a moment, silence. Then a voice. Hoarse female, barely more than a breath. "Father. Father, is that you, please? Help us. Please." He moved forward instinctively, placing his palm against the cold door. But then an unmistakable voice rang out behind him, sharp as broken glass. Father Ryan, Mother Catherine, Father Ryan. This area is strictly cloistered. Your presence here is most inappropriate. The voice, sharp and cold, froze him mid-step. He turned. Mother Catherine stood at the end of the corridor, like a wraith in her black habit, thinner than he remembered, but radiating authority like a blade. Beside her stood Sister Margaret, expression unreadable. And flanking them, a third figure, a large man in rough cloth sleeves, rolled to the elbow, arms thick as timber jaw clenched in silent threat. He was no priest, no orderly, just muscle. Forgive me, Father Ryan said, keeping his voice as even as he could. I lost my way after visiting the chapel. Mother Catherine's pale eyes narrowed, dissecting him. Her features, once almost gaunt with holy austerity, now seemed carved from marble, hard and immovable. This wing houses sisters under special spiritual direction, she said. Their seclusion is essential to their devotional practice. I heard someone calling for help, he said, not backing down. That was Sister Anne. Sister Margaret offered smoothly, stepping forward. She is engaged in advanced spiritual exercises. Some of our more devout sisters embrace the mortification of the flesh. Her voice was calm, practiced, as though she'd rehearsed the line. Their cries can be misinterpreted by those unfamiliar with such depth of discipline. Mother Catherine nodded once to the man. Mr. Callahan will show you out. Callahan stepped forward. This way, Father, he said. The false civility in his voice didn't mask the force of his grip as he seized Father Ryan's arm, firm, controlling and utterly unholy, in a place meant for sanctuary. As he was escorted down the corridor, Father Ryan cast one last glance over his shoulder at the heavy locked door. Us, the voice had said, not me. Us. How many women were imprisoned behind that door? Once outside the convent gates, he didn't wait for formality. He lashed the reins hard, spurring his horse into a gallop, the buggy wheels thundering over the spring mud. His thoughts churned faster than the hooves beneath him, the voice from the cell, the dwindling number of sisters, the terrified children, the padlocked wing. And now this Callahan, the hired brute, shadowing a convent like a henchman in a saloon. This was no longer the domain of internal church politics. This was something else entirely, something dark, something criminal. Back in town, Father Ryan didn't waste time on formalities. He bypassed Bishop Henny, who now seemed either complicit or willfully blind, and sent a telegram directly to the one man he believed might act. Urgent. Archbishop John Hughes, New York. Grave concerns regarding St. Mary's Convent, Wisconsin. Suspicious disappearances of multiple nuns. Evidence of imprisonment. Possible danger to remaining sisters. Local bishop unresponsive. Request immediate diocesan investigation. Father Thomas Ryan, St. Joseph's Parish. If you're feeling a chill down your spine as our story unfolds, you're not alone. Our community of mystery seekers often report a very real physical reaction to these long-buried stories. Take a moment now to like this video, leave a comment, or share it with someone who craves forgotten history. Your engagement helps us keep unearthing America's hidden shadows. As we return to the Wisconsin wilderness in 1858, a storm brews over the limestone walls of St. Mary's, a storm that will soon rip away the veil and reveal horrors beyond imagination. Archbishop Hughes, renowned for his iron grip on diocesan discipline and famously unsentimental demeanor, did not hesitate. Rather than alerting Bishop Henny, he dispatched his own trusted secretary, Monsignor Patrick Kelly, to conduct an unannounced canonical inspection. With him traveled Father Ryan and two senior priests from neighboring parishes, both known for their discretion and loyalty to the Archbishop. They arrived at the convent gates on the morning of April 17, 1858, unheralded, unexpected, and very much unwelcome. The spring morning had broken clear and warm, the kind that would usually draw Wisconsin farmers out to inspect their thawing fields and breathe in the promise of the planting season. But as the clerical carriage rolled up the gravel path to St. Mary's Convent, the warmth in the air could not dispel the chill that clung to the limestone walls. A heaviness seemed to press down upon the very buildings, an invisible fog of dread. Overhead, a pair of ravens circled the old bell tower, their shrill cries cutting across the silence like a warning. It was as if the birds themselves sensed that something foul had taken root within. The reception was telling. Mother Catherine appeared at the convent's main door before the horses had even stilled. Her usual poise was absent. Her eyes, always calculating and cool, now flickered with something close to panic. Her hands trembled as she folded them beneath her scapula. Behind her, nuns bustled in hurried motion like ants whose nest had been struck. Through the parlor window, Father Ryan spotted two young sisters rushing toward the kitchen arms, laden with bundles of papers. A moment later, acrid smoke began to curl through the courtyard air, an unmistakable scent of burning parchment. Someone was destroying records. "This is most irregular," Monsignor Mother Catherine said, stepping aside stiffly as the clergy entered the front hall. Her voice, once velvet and calm, had gone brittle at the edges. "We have procedures for official visitations. Bishop Henny always sends word well in advance, which is precisely why Archbishop Hughes instructed me not to notify you," Monsignor Kelly replied evenly. He stood with quiet authority, a man in his early 50s, his silver hair brushed back neatly, his face deeply lined by years in both the battlefield and the bishop's office. Unlike Bishop Henny, he bore no trace of indulgence. His eyes, gray and unblinking, fixed on her with the weight of a higher power. "I have here a letter," he continued, withdrawing the parchment, bearing the red wax seal of the Archbishop, authorizing a full inspection of this institution. "All grounds, all records, and all residents. There will be no exceptions." Mother Catherine's gaze flicked just for an instant to Sister Margaret, who stood half-shrouded in a shadowed doorway, her expression an impassive mask. A look passed between them, quick, unreadable. Then Mother Catherine turned back with a strained smile. "Of course, Monsignor. St. Mary's has nothing to conceal," she said, the lie sitting heavy in the air. "However, I must caution you that some of our sisters are in seclusion undergoing intense spiritual discipline. Their sacred time must be respected. My authority extends to all areas," Monsignor Kelly said firmly, "including those that have been conveniently hidden behind locked doors. The investigation began at once. The four men split into teams, Monsignor Kelly and Father Ryan, making straight for the north wing, while the two senior priests began reviewing the convent's ledgers and interviewing the remaining sisters. As they neared the sealed residential hall, they found Sister Elizabeth standing like a sentinel in the corridor, her face pale but set with a stubbornness that surprised even Father Ryan. Gone was the soft-spoken caretaker of the orphans. In her place stood a woman bracing against something she feared more than holy authority. "Mother Catherine has forbidden entrance to this wing," she said, voice taut. "There are sisters in retreat." Sister Elizabeth, Monsignor Kelly, said, his tone still composed, but growing firmer, "I am here under direct orders from Archbishop Hughes. If you do not stand aside, I will consider your actions a willful violation of your vow of obedience." Something in her face crumbled. "You don't understand what you're doing," she said, her voice breaking into a whisper. "He will not be pleased." Kelly froze. Father Ryan stepped forward, heart thudding. "Do you mean Bishop Henny?" But Sister Elizabeth only shook her head and glanced toward the tall windows behind them, as if expecting someone to appear. "No," she said quietly, "not the bishop." Then she stepped aside. Father Ryan and Monsignor Kelly exchanged a look, and Kelly reached for the keys Sister Elizabeth silently handed over from her pocket hands, shaking. It was heavy and old iron, its edges worn smooth from years of use. With a creak, the lock turned, and the door groaned open. What they found on the other side would later appear in Monsignor Kelly's written report to Archbishop Hughes, filed with the Vatican Archive under Grave Matters Irregularities in the Diocese of Milwaukee. The document, 40 pages long, would describe what lay behind that door in language both clinical and stunned. But no written word, no ink on any page could prepare them for what they would see next. After a long, suffocating pause, Sister Elizabeth finally stepped aside. Monsignor Kelly wasted no time. With steady hands, he inserted the heavy iron key into the ancient lock. The door creaked open on rusted hinges, releasing a wave of putrid air so foul that even the seasoned cleric staggered back. Father Ryan raised his sleeve to his nose, already bracing for what he might find. But nothing could have prepared them. Inside the small room, no more than 15 feet across, 5 women huddled in shadows. It had once been a storage closet, stone walls, no heat, a single high window boarded from the outside. The only furnishings were a bucket of foul water, a chamber pot in the corner, and a few threadbare pallets on the cold stone floor. There was no light, save the narrow shaft now spilling in from the open doorway. The women inside the missing nuns were spectral. Hollow-eyed, their faces gaunt with starvation, hair-matted cheeks sunken. Their once black habits were torn, crusted with dirt and old blood. Their bodies bore bruises and burns in various states of healing. One woman, a whisper of the vibrant Sister Josephine Brady, lay curled against the wall, her belly shockingly distended in late pregnancy. The sight of it on her otherwise emaciated frame was so jarring, so grotesquely incongruent, that Father Ryan had to turn away one hand, gripping the doorframe as bile rose in his throat. Monsignor Kelly made the sign of the cross with shaking fingers. "In nomine Patris," he murmured. "What madness is this?" From the far corner, a gaunt figure began to stir. Sister Rebecca Murphy, once so strong and quick to laugh, was now a husk of that memory. She rose shakily to her feet, skeletal hands gripping the stone wall for balance, Father Ryan. Her voice cracked raw from either screaming or silence. "You came back." He moved to her side at once, guiding her gently toward the chair that a priest had hurried in from the hallway. She collapsed into it like a rag doll, her eyes fluttering. "They're preparing us," she whispered, clinging to the edge of consciousness. "For the doctor. For the house in Chicago," what Dr. Monsignor Kelly asked, kneeling before her, not caring for the dust on his cassock. "What house?" "Dr. Matthews," she breathed. "He examines us, decides which are suitable." Her voice dropped further, and tears pooled in her sunken eyes. "The men pay more for nuns," she choked. "For brides of Christ." That's what Mother Catherine tells them. The room fell deathly silent, while Father Ryan and Monsignor Kelly summoned aid-food blankets, clean water, and gentle hands. The other clergy fanned out across the convent. What they uncovered would be stitched into Vatican records under sealed covers and spoken of in whispers for generations. In a hidden chamber behind the infirmary, accessible only through a disguised door in the stone wall, they discovered Sister Margaret's private quarters. A cot, a wash basin, and shelves upon shelves of medicinal vials, laudanum, chloroform, belladonna. Tinctures meant not for healing, but for incapacitation. One cabinet bore hand-carved restraints, and on the desk a leather-bound ledger. Inside were entries written in tight clinical script. Dosages, reactions, terms like sedated successfully or uncooperative needs stronger dosage. Margins annotated with remarks too anxious will bruise easily attractive retain for further evaluation. But it was in the convent's bookkeeping office that the most damning evidence awaited. The priests, combing through the financial records, unearthed ledgers that told a chilling tale. While the convent's external reports claimed poverty, the internal books revealed regular and substantial deposits. Payments arrived quarterly from shadowy sources labeled only by initials or code names. Deposits often coincided with the disappearance of a sister. Each was listed like a shipment. May 1855. Sister Agnes O'Connor. Transferred. Commission $400. Package delivered to Chicago establishment. Condition excellent. November 1856. Sister Teresa Donovan. Unsuitable due to resistance, terminated. No commission. The word terminated made even the most seasoned priest go pale. The deeper they looked, the more horrifying the pattern became. Through whispered interviews with the freed nuns, once fed and calmed, Monsignor Kelly began piecing together the unthinkable truth. These women had not merely been abused. They had been trafficked. The very convent that had been praised from the pulpit, that received generous praise in Protestant newspapers for its charity, had been a front for a decades-long criminal operation, and its leaders, not nuns at all. It was Sister Claire O'Donnell, fragile but fierce, who provided the final key. "They aren't who they say they are," she whispered, clutching her blanket like armor. "I heard them one night months ago, arguing." Mother Catherine called Sister Margaret by her real name. Catherine. She said they'd come too far to let it fall apart. Said they'd changed identities before and could do it again if they had to. That they'd done it in Europe. Monsignor Kelly stood slowly, the pieces now locking into place with sickening clarity. They weren't merely predators masquerading as pious women. They were professional imposters, criminals who had infiltrated the Catholic hierarchy using stolen identities and false documents. The church had been their disguise, their shield, and St. Mary's had been their hunting ground. What had begun as whispers in the garden, silences at the dinner table, empty cots and missing names was now fully laid bare in all its vile, sacrilegious horror. But worse still, they weren't alone, and justice, though coming swiftly now, would require all the strength the church could summon. The truth once pried from beneath layers of silence and sin emerged like a corpse from a flooded grave, bloated, rotted, undeniable. The real Mother Catherine Murphy, as confirmed by testimony from Sister Margaret's own former assistant, had died within weeks of arriving in Wisconsin, poisoned. She added something to her tea. The young infirmary nun whispered, her voice shaking with memory. That night, the original Mother Catherine began vomiting blood. Sister Margaret, the false Margaret, diagnosed it as consumption. We were told to keep away. No one was permitted to see her but Margaret herself. She was dead within 3 days. Her body was buried quietly with no ceremony and no witnesses beyond the impostors who had taken over. And from that moment on, St. Mary's ceased to be a convent in any spiritual sense. It became a hunting ground, cloaked in sanctity, a front for an intricate network of brothels that operated under the guise of houses of charity across the Midwest, St. Louis, Chicago, Milwaukee, and beyond. The scheme was as methodical as it was monstrous. Young nuns, especially those deemed beautiful, obedient, or meek, were marked. First isolated under the guise of discipline, forced to endure false accusations of gluttony, pride, or sloth, public confessions, days of penance and hunger. Then came the drugging, often with laudanum drawn from Sister Margaret's tidy stock of tinctures and tonics. A few drops in a nightly tonic, a powder stirred into sacramental wine, and when sufficiently sedated, the predators were brought in. Sister Rebecca recounted the horror with the hollow tone of a woman who had long since learned to detach from her pain. They came after Compline when the convent was silent, she said. Men in coats finer than any we'd seen, always smelling of cigar smoke, cologne, and whiskey. Mother Catherine led them to us herself. She paused. They paid extra to keep us in our habits. The priest taking her statement wept openly. The violations were not isolated. They were repeated, systematic, paid for by men of influence, judges, bankers, shipping magnates who prized the idea of defiling brides of Christ. Women who had taken holy vows. Some were sold outright, shipped off to the houses of charity in Chicago and St. Louis. Others, once made pregnant, were kept hidden until they gave birth. The babies never seen again, presumed sold or killed, the children. Sister Claire added, her voice nearly inaudible. They didn't survive. And when they didn't, she could not finish. Her hands trembled too badly to hold the tea offered by a parish nurse. But the horror extended even deeper. The orphanage, once touted as a beacon of Christian charity, was in fact a secondary source of human trafficking. Older girls, especially those on the verge of puberty, were adopted by so-called benefactors. Placed with good Catholic families, the records claimed. In reality, they were sold to the same brothels. Boys were placed, yes, but into rural farms as unpaid laborers, while Mother Catherine collected a tidy fee from each arrangement. And those who resisted, those who dared to question, their fate was even darker. Sister Teresa Donovan had not gone to Montreal for retreat, as once claimed in morning prayers. She had been held in the locked chamber for weeks, assaulted, starved. When her spirit would not break, she was taken to the garden. According to Sister Rebecca and confirmed by Sister Claire, Mother Catherine made the others watch. She said it was a lesson in obedience. Sister Claire whispered, her rosary clutched so tightly it left welts in her palms. Sister Teresa prayed, right until the end. She was praying the glorious mysteries as Callahan tightened the rope. At least 3 other bodies lay in shallow, unmarked graves beneath the vegetable beds, where carrots and medicinal herbs once grew. Their names would later be identified through missing persons reports, faded novitiate records, and testimony from surviving sisters. One had been only 17. That evening, April 17th, 1858, Monsignor Patrick Kelly, his face pale, his hands blood-stained from helping lift the skeletal women from their prison, made the decision. In the name of Christ, this convent is hereby closed. Guards were stationed at every door. Armed deputies, alerted by Father Ryan's earlier ride to town, arrived by midnight to secure the premises. No one entered. No one left. The archives, books, ledgers, letters, all were sealed. The building itself was declared a crime scene. Mother Catherine, Sister Elizabeth, and Sister Margaret were placed under ecclesiastical arrest, confined to separate cells, under constant watch by 2 senior priests and 3 local deputies. Callahan was found trying to flee at dawn with forged travel documents and a bag containing $2,300 in cash, a vast fortune for the time. He was tackled by a farmhand on the edge of the property, subdued with a broken rake handle, and delivered to the sheriff with his mouth bleeding and his arm dislocated. That night, the bells of St. Mary's, silent for weeks, rang once more, but not for prayer. They rang to summon justice. The public outcry, once the story reached the wider diocese and beyond, was immediate and thunderous. Newspapers across the Midwest seized upon the scandal with sensational headlines. Hell behind the Habit Chicago Tribune. Brides of Christ betrayed Milwaukee Gazette. The saintly disguise of Sin Convent of Horror exposed New Orleans Courier. Protestant publications, eager to tarnish the Catholic Church's already tenuous image in frontier America, published lurid illustrations of veiled nuns shackled in dungeons and sinister priests looming over innocent girls. But no embellishment, no dramatized etching or imagined dialogue could match the raw horror of the facts themselves. The little leather notebook sewn into Sister Elizabeth's mattress became the centerpiece of both ecclesiastical and criminal proceedings. It catalogued with chilling precision the lives and final moments of 40 victims, 23 nuns, and 17 girls, many as young as 12. One line under the heading "Package Declined" read, "Sister Helena. Fractured jaw, too much swelling. Instructed Margaret to administer tonic. Body buried behind greenhouse." In cold ink, there were codes indicating retraining, repeated assaults, termination, or disposal, a word used no fewer than 11 times. The most shocking entry came near the end, dated only March 1858, SMC high resistance, intelligence above expected. Keep for now, potential leverage if discovered, SMC, Sister Mary Collins, the one who had bravely written the note that began it all. She was found days later in a feverish state in a hidden room above the refectory, accessible only through a rotating section of wall. Emaciated, dehydrated, and too weak to speak, she clutched a rosary made from knotted threads, whispering prayers in a voice barely audible. Her recovery was long and uncertain. As for Mother Catherine and Sister Margaret, their disappearance remained an open wound. Rumors spread like wildfire that they had fled to Canada under false identities, that they had died in the wilderness, or even that secret orders within the church had spirited them away to avoid further scandal. Some whispered they had joined a larger network of vice using their talents elsewhere. Authorities offered rewards and warrants were issued in 3 states, but no confirmed sightings ever surfaced. Only Sister Elizabeth remained in custody. Once the most poised and hospitable face of St. Mary's, she had descended into near catatonia. When questioned, she offered fragmented phrases. They promised I'd be saved. The babies, we weren't supposed to see them. God's will. Catherine said it was God's will. She read from books, not in Latin. A team of priest doctors and mentalists attempted to extract more information, but Sister Elizabeth would never fully recover. She was eventually committed to a cloistered convent in Quebec, where she spent the rest of her life in silent prayer under close supervision. She died in 1881, reportedly clutching a doll she claimed was her child. Dr. William Matthews was arrested in a brothel raid in Cincinnati in 1860 and identified through the coded ledgers. Though aged and nearly blind by that time, he confessed to his role in exchange for leniency. His chilling confession, documented in court records, included the phrase, "I was fascinated by the purity. It made them worth more, you see, in every sense." He was sentenced to life in prison and died 2 years later after being beaten by other inmates. The church's reckoning. The Catholic Church, rocked by the scandal, faced increasing pressure from both the public and within its own ranks. Bishop John Henney, who had dismissed Father Ryan's early warnings, was summoned to Rome for questioning. Though he claimed ignorance, it was discovered that he had received generous donations from St. Mary's. Over the years, money traced directly to the trafficking operation. He was quietly removed from his post and reassigned to a minor administrative role in Sicily. The church released a carefully worded statement expressing deep sorrow for the spiritual and physical harm inflicted upon innocent souls. Behind closed doors, however, there were internal reforms. New regulations for inspections, background checks for superiors, greater transparency in convent operations. But for many, the damage was done. The faithful struggled. The devout questioned. The young women who had once eagerly taken the veil now hesitated. And the survivors, those rescued from the hidden room, the orphans reclaimed, faced a lifetime of recovery. Epilogue. The Garden and the Crosses. St. Mary's Convent was officially deconsecrated and abandoned. the once beautiful grounds fell into disrepair. The limestone walls, stained by time and memory, became a place of whispered stories and ghostly sightings. Children from nearby towns dared each other to touch the garden gate, now overgrown with ivy and thorn. In 1873, a group of nuns from the Sisters of Mercy returned to the site under a new mission to establish a memorial. The bodies of the murdered nuns were exhumed with care, their remains identified through scraps of cloth rosaries or notes hidden in seams. They were reburied beneath simple white crosses in a newly sanctified garden. At the center stood a marble statue of the Virgin Mary, her hands open in sorrow and shelter, and beneath her feet, etched in stone, the words, "In memory of those who suffered in silence. May justice never sleep again." In the quiet of Wisconsin's farmlands, the soil remembers what men and churches would rather forget. What happened at St. Mary's Convent in the 1850s was not simply a scandal, it was a desecration, a betrayal that reached deep into the heart of the faithful. And though the men and women behind it fled into shadow, the bones they buried, the cries they silenced, and the lives they ruined refused to be forgotten. Sister Mary Collins, once thought rescued, was found beneath bean plants, murdered not long after she tried to expose the truth. Sister Elizabeth Margaret Wilson lived her final years screaming at phantoms no one else could see. Her cries, recorded in asylum logs, were said to rise every night at the hour of matins. "He is coming. I betrayed the Master. He is coming." Mother Catherine and Sister Margaret vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and whispered sightings in ports far from God's reach. Were they caught in Havana? Were they seen on steamboats with new habits, new names? No one knows for sure. But the world they built, the buyers, the doctors, the men who walked past crosses and candles to enter a house of God, only to bring hell with them, some escaped judgment. Others didn't. James Callahan, the brute enforcer, was hanged for killing a Chicago officer. His final words confirmed what Sister Rebecca had whispered. In near death, they planned for this. She said they'd rise again, somewhere else, under new names. The church protects its own. The convent was razed, a decade later deemed haunted by the locals, cursed by the silence of the church. The ground, salted and sown with wildflowers, grew nothing for many years. But even now, when the wind moves through those fields, some say you can hear the bells ring at odd hours, or see a flash of white in the brush, like a habit fleeing just out of sight. And in the chapel, ruins beneath the statue of the Virgin, there's a plaque weathered by storms for those whose faith was broken. May their cries reach heaven before another door is locked.